Hello and welcome back to another PC build. Today I'm going to show you how to build a PC in Corsair's 5000D Airflow. And this is going to be another full step-by-step PC build guide where I'm going to show you how to put all the parts I've got in front of me together and come up with a fully working PC by the end of the video. So if you've never built a PC before, you've definitely come to the right place. So let's take a look at the parts I've chosen for today's build. For the motherboard, I've gone with ASRock's brand new B550 Phantom Gaming Riptide motherboard. I've already done a full unboxing and overview for this motherboard. If you want to find out more about it, you'll find a link to that video in the description. For the CPU, I've gone with AMD's Ryzen 9 5900X, which is a 12-core, 24-thread CPU, which should give us a really powerful PC. Keeping that CPU cool, I've gone with Be Quiet's latest AIO. It's the Silent Loop 2, and I've got the 360mm version. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 M.2 SSD for this build. It's from Sabrent, and it's their blistering fast Rocket 4 Plus drive, and I've got the 2TB capacity version. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston's HyperX Fury RGB at 3600MHz speed. For the graphics card, I've gone with Nvidia's 3060 Ti. Powering the whole build, I've got Be Quiet's brand new Pure Power 11 fully modular power supply, and I've got the 650-watt version. For case fans, I'm going to be using Lian Li's latest version of the Unifans, the IL120s, and this case will accommodate up to 10 case fans, and that's exactly what I'm going to be putting in it. The final part for today's build is some white cable extensions from CableMod, and obviously these are optional, but it will significantly improve the look of the build. Okay, that's all the parts covered, let's get on with the build. The first thing I want to do is get the case prepared, and I'll point out the main case features as we go. The tempered glass side panel is held on with two captive thumb screws at the back. Once we have loosened these, we can simply pull the panel out to the side and lift it away. The front panel can simply be removed by pulling it off. And beneath this we've got a dust filter. We can pull this down and lift it away. The top panel is removed in exactly the same way, just by lifting it up from the top. Beneath it we've got a magnetic dust filter which can simply lift it up and away. The other side panel is removed in exactly the same way. Loosen up the captive thumb screws, slide the panel out to the side, and then simply lift it away. Taking a look at the panel we've just removed, you can see we've got perforations and a magnetic dust filter. Taking a closer look at the rear of the case, we've got this door which opens up, which is great because it's going to hide all our cables. Taking a look in the back of the case, you can see we've got some cable raceways with Velcro straps. We've got a PWM fan hub which will accommodate up to 6 fans, and you can see our 2 included case fans are already plugged into it. We've got 3 2.5-inch SSD mounts which can be removed by loosening the thumb screw at the top and lifting away. Alternatively, 2 of these can be mounted in the main body of the case. Down at the bottom of the case where our power supply goes, we've got an additional panel which allows us to change the layout of the front of the case. I'll show you how this works when we move to the front. Down at the bottom of the case we've got a hard drive cage which will accommodate up to 2 3.5-inch drives, and this is normally where we get our accessory box, so this is going to contain all the screws that we're going to need for the build. As we've mentioned, we're going with a single M.2 SSD, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the hard drive cage to make more room for our power supply and cables. It's held on with 2 thumb screws over to the side. Taking a closer look at the internal layout of the case, we can see we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slots and 2 vertical slots. We've got a single 120mm fan at the rear of the case which is plugged into our fan hub, and we're also able to mount 2 of the 2.5-inch drives directly in the main body of the case. At the front of the case we've got another 120mm fan. This is on a removable fan bracket. To remove the bracket we just need to loosen 2 thumb screws, one at the top, one at the bottom. Then we can simply pull the bracket away and lift it out. And I have already unplugged the fan from the fan hub at the back. So as I've mentioned, I'm planning on using the Lian Li Unifan, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this fan from the bracket and also the fan at the back of the case. Taking a look at the case's fan mounting locations, we can mount 3 120mm fans on the removable bracket at the front, a further 3 at the top, and 1 at the rear. I've already told you the case will accommodate up to 10 case fans, and you probably noted the perforations on the solid side panel. To use the side mounting locations where we can mount another 3 120mm fans, we need to remove this bracket. To remove the bracket, we've got 2 screws to remove, one here, and there's also 2 thumb screws in here which we need to remove. With the 2 screws removed and the thumb screws loosened, we should simply be able to remove this panel. Again, using the side of the case for fans is optional, and obviously if you don't want to do this, leave the panel on and it's going to make everything look nice and tidy. So you might notice this panel here is going to block our fans at the back and it's not going to look so good. So this is what the replacement panel was for at the back. So we can go ahead and remove this. There's 2 thumb screws, there's one at the side and then one at the back here. And once we've removed these, we can simply lift this panel up and away. We can then go ahead and take our replacement panel, slot it into place, and then use a single thumb screw at the back to secure it into place. And you see this is going to look a whole lot tidier at the side and we're going to be able to see all our fans and the airflow isn't going to be obstructed. But importantly, this little panel here is going to keep all our power supply cables from spilling into the front of the case. We're now ready to start work on the motherboard and we're going to do as much work with the motherboard while we have it on the table as we can. So we're going to go ahead and install our CPU, the brackets for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD and our RAM all before we put the motherboard into the case. To prepare the motherboard to receive the CPU, we just need to open this lever all the way to the right hand side. Importantly, before we install our CPU, you'll notice this top corner here has a little triangle on it and there's also a little mark on the motherboard. And we need to line up a marker on the CPU with this corner. This is our CPU. You'll notice I'm holding it by the sides, and the reason for that is I don't want to damage these gold pins on the underside of the CPU. If you look at the corner of the CPU at the top of the screen, you'll notice it has a gold triangle on it. If I turn it round and you have a look now, the same corner is now down the bottom left hand side and there's also a little gold triangle on that corner as well. So that's the corner we're going to need to line up with the mark on the socket. Okay, so I've got the CPU lined up the right way. I'm going to hover it over to the socket and just let it fall into place. If it doesn't fall in immediately, I'm going to move it about. And then at one point, like it has done now, it'll just fall into the socket. I'm not going to go pushing down on it where I can damage the pins. To secure our CPU, all I'm going to do is close the lever. Next, we can go ahead and install the brackets for our CPU cooler. To do this, we're going to need to remove the standard brackets. Each is held on with 2 screws. Importantly, don't throw these away, put them in your motherboard box because if you want to change your CPU cooler or sell your motherboard, you'll need these in the future. Next, we need to go ahead and put a spacer on each of the corners. Then we've got 2 of these little brackets to go on. There's 2 holes on each side. One is labelled AM4, so I'm going to go ahead and put the screws through the ones labelled AM4. And then I'm going to lower this down on top of the spacers. And what I have found, if you give the screws a little turn by hand, first of all, it just helps hold things in place. And then we can go ahead and tighten things up with the screwdriver. We're now ready to install our M.2 SSD, and you'll notice there's 3 places in this motherboard you can install an M.2 drive. There's one behind this heatsink, there's one here, and there's one here. Now this is only a short M.2 SSD if you want to add Wi-Fi into the motherboard, so there's only 2 that are actually going to be able to accommodate our drive. As this is a B550 motherboard, it's only the top slot that will support the Gen 4 speed, so we're going to want to install our drive behind this heatsink. It will work in this bottom socket, but it will be limited to Gen 3 speeds. The heatsink is held on with 2 screws, we'll go ahead and remove them. So to install our drive, all we need to do is line it up with the socket, insert it in it at a slight angle, and then when we lower it down and put our heatsink back on, this screw is also going to secure the drive as well as securing the heatsink. Just before we put the heatsink back on, there's some plastic protection we need to remove, and then we can go ahead and lower our heatsink down into place. And then we'll go ahead and secure things into place with the 2 screws we removed earlier on. We're now ready to go ahead and install our RAM, and we just need to open the clips on all 4 of the slots. Then we can go ahead and line the RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy everything is in place, we just need to apply some firm pressure to the top. The RAM is going to lock into place and the clip close. Next we need to go ahead and install the motherboard's I/O shield into the case, so we'll go ahead and line things up. Once we're happy everything's in place, just apply some firm pressure, obviously taking care not to cut your fingers. If we look carefully at the back of the case, the middle standoff doesn't have a screw and there's a long protruding bit. It's going to go through the centre hole in the motherboard and help hold it in place, allowing us to get the other screws into place. So we go ahead and line the motherboard up with the I/O shield at the back of the case and try and get that middle standoff through the motherboard, and then that is going to hold the motherboard in place. We can then secure the motherboard in place with the screws from the accessory box. Next we can go ahead and get our case cables plugged in. So I'm going to start off with our HD audio cable, which is going to go into this header on the bottom left hand side of the motherboard, and we're going to need to install it with the HD audio text facing up the way. Then moving over to the header in the bottom right hand side of the motherboard, and these are for our front panel connectors, our power switch, our reset switch and our power LED. So starting off with the bottom row into pins 3 and 4 from the left hand side, I'm going to go ahead and plug in our reset switch. Doesn't matter which way it goes, so I'm just going to plug it in with the text facing down the way. Moving up to the top row, pins 1 and 2 from the left hand side are for power LED positive and power LED negative. Pins 3 and 4 in the top row from the left hand side are for the power switch. Again, it doesn't matter which way this one goes, so I'm going to plug it in with the text facing down the way. And then I'm just going to go ahead and pull all the excess cable through to the back. Next I'm going to plug in our USB 3.0 cable, which lets the 2 Type A ports in the top of the case work. There's 2 places we can plug it. We can plug it into this right angle connector or the forward facing connector here. I think it's going to look tidier into the right angle connector. So line things up, push into place and then pull all the excess cable through to the back. Next we've got our Type C connector. I'm going to bring it through this cutout here. It goes into this header here, line it up and push into place. At the back of the case there's 2 case cables I haven't plugged in. One is a SATA connector for power and the other is a 4-pin PWM connector, and both these cables go to our fan hub at the back of the case. Now I'm not planning on using this fan hub, so there's no reason for me to plug these into our motherboard or the SATA cable into our power supply. If you are planning on using the hub, then obviously plug this into one of the PWM connectors on your motherboard and this one into your power supply. Okay, so this is our power supply, and as I mentioned, it's fully modular, which means it comes without any of the cables plugged in, and the big advantage of this is you only need to plug the cables in that you're going to need to use. I've gone ahead and done this because I don't think you want to watch me doing this. So we've got a 24-pin connector, we've got an 8-pin and a 4-pin EPS connector to provide additional power to our CPU. I've got a single PCIe cable which has got 2 6+2 pins, and I've also plugged in a SATA cable as well. Although we're not going to install any SATA drives, we are going to need this to power our hub, which we're going to use for our Lian Li fans. Now I did mention I was going to use some white cable extensions, so I'm going to go ahead and plug one of these into our 24-pin connector. There we go. I've also got this custom cable for the graphics card. It contains a 12-pin connector to 2 8-pin connectors, and this doesn't come as part of the cable kit. You need to get this separately from CableMod. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it into our PCIe cable. We'll line the 6 and the 2-pin connectors up and plug things into place. There we go. Now I'm not going to add white cable extensions into these cables, providing additional power to the CPU, and the reason for that is once we put our radiator at the top, you're not going to see these cables anyway, and cable management is much easier without the cable extensions. Okay, we're now ready to go ahead and get the power supply installed in the case. Importantly, we're going to want to install it with the power supply's intake fan facing down the way. If we take a closer look at the bottom of the case, you'll notice we've got a perforated panel down here, and beneath it there is a removable dust filter. So this is where our power supply is going to get its fresh air from. If you install it the wrong way round, it's going to be up against the inside of the case, where it's going to get hot air from inside the case rather than cool air from outside the case. Okay, so if we lift these cables up out of the way and slide our power supply in at the bottom, all the way to the back of the case. Then we can go ahead and get our power supply secured into place using the screws that came with the power supply. Then we can go ahead and plug in the cables. So I'm going to bring our 24-pin connector through this cutout, line it up with the motherboard and push into place. And then we can use these cable combs to tidy up the cable. Up at the top of the case, I'm going to bring our 8-pin EPS cable through, line it up with the header, and push into place. Same thing with our 4-pin cable, bring it through, line it up, and push into place. We're now ready to start working the IIO, and the first thing for us to do is to go ahead and get our fans installed on the radiator. So we've got these long radiator screws, which I'm going to go ahead and line up. And then we can go ahead and just tighten the screws up with the screwdriver. Coming from each of the fans, we've got a single 4-pin PWM connector, and these all need to go into our CPU fan header. So Be Quiet include a 3-to-1 PWM splitter cable, so we're going to need to go ahead and plug these into the splitter cable. So that now leaves us a single 4-pin PWM fan connector to go into our CPU fan header. Take a look at the cables coming from our pump, and we've got 2 cables coming from the pump. One is a 3-pin fan connector, which is going to go into our pump fan header on the motherboard. The other is a 3-pin 5-volt addressable ARGB connector, which we're going to plug into one of the ARGB headers on our motherboard. One of the nice things that Be Quiet do is they include a splitter cable, which is going to allow you to daisy chain another device onto it if you're going to need it. We're not going to need this for this build. Next, we can go ahead and line our AIO up at the top of the case, and then get things secured into place using some of the short radiator screws. Then we can go ahead and reapply the dust filter to the top of the case and also the top panel. Next, I'm going to go ahead and pull all the cables coming from the fans through to the back of the case. I'm then going to go ahead and bring the 4-pin PWM connector back through again, and go ahead and plug this into our CPU fan header, which is just at the top of the motherboard. And then again, pull the excess cable through to the back. Next, we need to add a pea-sized amount of thermal paste to the centre of the CPU. If you're using the IO for the first time, you're going to have some plastic protection to remove from the cold plate. I've used this before, so I can skip this step. And then I just want to go ahead and line this up with the bracket we secured on the motherboard. Once I'm happy everything's lined up, we can go ahead and tighten things up with the screwdriver. As I've mentioned, we've got 2 cables coming from the pump. The first is a 3-pin fan connector, which is going to go into our pump header, which is just here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the excess cable up and out of the way and tuck it in. Next, we've got a 3-pin 5-volt addressable ARGB connector. We've got a header in the top right-hand corner of the motherboard, so I'm going to go ahead and plug it into here. And then what I'm going to do is just pull all the excess cable through to the back of the case. This brings us onto our Lian Li Unifans, and we're going to have 3 fans at the front, 3 fans at the side, and 1 fan at the rear. So we can go ahead and join the fans together. Really easy. Just line them up and push in together. Then we need to add one of these connectors to each group of Lian Li Unifans. So we'll go ahead and clip this one on the side and push into place. Taking our single fan, three fans, go ahead, line things up and push into place. Now, coming from each group of fans, one of the nice things is we've only got 2 cables. We've got a standard 4-pin fan connector and we've got an ARGB connector. Let's go ahead and get these installed. So we can go ahead and secure the fans at the front of the case to the removable bracket that we removed earlier on. So after you've seen me secure these to the bracket, I've just turned the fans round, so the wires are now coming from the top of the bracket, because I think this is going to work better at the back of the case. So we can go ahead and slide the bracket into place. There we go. and secure it into place with the 2 thumb screws. We can then go ahead and take our next group of Lian Li Unifans, slide them into place, and then we'll go ahead and get these secured at the back of the case. One of the things I forgot to mention earlier, this door is removable. It's probably better to take this off at the start of the build. And then we can go ahead and add the rear fan. Then we can go ahead and resecure the dust filter and front panel. This is our Lian Li fan hub, and it's got 4 channels, 1, 2, 3 and 4. And we've got 2 connectors in each channel, and they're the 2 connectors coming from each group of Lian Li Unifans, a 4-pin fan connector and an ARGB connector. So I'm going to go ahead and get these plugged in. So the 2 connectors coming from our rear fans, we're going to go ahead and plug in the 4-pin PWM fan connector and also the ARGB connector. Coming from the other end of our hub, we've got 3 connectors, one of which is already plugged in. We've got a USB cable plugged in, which we're going to need to plug into one of the USB 2.0 headers on our motherboard. Into the larger connection, we can go ahead and plug the included cable, which is a SATA power connector to power our hub. So we need to plug this other end into one of the SATA cables coming from our power supply. Then we'll go ahead and plug the final connector in. It's got 2 cables coming from it. One is a 3-pin 5V ARGB connector, and the other is a 4-pin PWM connector. So we need to plug these in to allow our motherboard to control the speed of the fans and also the RGB effect if we wish. So I'm going to go ahead and get all these cables plugged in. Okay, so while we're at the back of the case, just going to go ahead and plug the SATA cable in. Down at the bottom of the motherboard, we've got 3 USB 2.0 connectors. So I'm just going to go ahead and plug into this one here, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. Bringing our PWM connector here, we've got 2 fan headers, so I'm going to go ahead and plug into here. And then right next to that fan header, we've got our ARGB connector, so I'm going to go ahead and plug into here as well. And then again, pull any excess cable through to the back. The last thing for us to do is install our graphics card, so we need to remove the 2nd and 3rd horizontal bracket. Then we just need to open the clip on the top PCIe slot. Next, we just need to go ahead and line our graphics card up with the slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, just some firm pressure to the graphics card and it will clip into place and the clip will close. Then we can go ahead and secure our graphics card into place with the 2 thumb screws we removed earlier on. If you are going with a much bigger graphics card, ASRock include a GPU support bracket with the motherboard, which is a really nice feature to have. Obviously this graphics card is so small, we don't need a support bracket. Then we can go ahead and bring our power cable for our graphics card through this cutout at the bottom. Go ahead and get things plugged into the graphics card. And then we can use the cable combs to tidy up the cables coming from the graphics card. Final thing to do is some cable management, so I'm going to use some double-sided adhesive to secure our Lian Li hub to this plate here in the back of the case. We've got some raceways and of course there includes some Velcro straps to make cable management easier. So we'll go ahead and get the cables tidied up. Okay, so that's the build complete. We've now reached the important stage where we need to flip the power switch and see does it work. Importantly, I have loaded a Windows 10 bootable USB drive into the back of the PC. If you don't know how to make one of those, I've made a video on it and you'll find a link to that in the description. Okay, here goes. So that's a good sign. We've got lights and fans spinning. Next thing, we're just going to need to watch the monitor and see what happens. So there's a good sign. We've got the Windows logo appearing, which means it's found the bootable drive in the back of the PC and loaded off that. And we're up on the Windows installer screen. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you how to install Windows 10, but to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to flip over to the screen mode. Okay, I'm now going to show you how to install Windows 10. Over the next lot of screens, I'm going to pick the options that are relevant to me. Obviously, if you have different options, pick the ones that are relevant to you. As well, between all the steps, I'm going to go ahead and speed everything up. I'm from the United Kingdom, so I'm going to click Next. I'm going to click Install Now. If you've got a Windows 10 product key, you can go ahead and enter it in the box. If you don't have one, I'll show you what you do. You click I don't have a product key. Select the version of Windows you're going to get a product key for in the future. I'm going to select Windows 10 Pro and click Next. We're going to accept the license terms. And we're going to go for a custom install. So as we've only got one drive installed, only one drive is showing up. So I'm going to click on it and click Next. And this step will take a little bit of time, so I'll go ahead and speed things up. Okay, so I'm from the United Kingdom. I'm going to click Yes, Yes again. I'm going to skip a secondary keyboard. So it's asking us to connect to a network. I do have an Ethernet cable plugged into the PC, but it doesn't seem to be recognizing it. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, and it's to do with the drivers not being installed, and we'll have to install the drivers later to get things to work. So we're going to have to click I don't have internet. We're going to click on Continue with limited setup, and then I'm going to type my name in. I'm going to have to create a password, and then create 3 security questions. I'm going to click Don't use online speech recognition. No to let apps use my location, no to find my device, just the required data, no to inking, no again, no again. I'm going to click on Not Now. Okay, that's Windows installed. The first thing for us to do is to get connected to the internet, and if we hover down here, you can see there's no connections available. So we're going to need to install our drivers before the Ethernet cable is going to be picked up. Okay, so we're going to get our Ethernet drivers from ASRock's page, and I'll show you this later on. I've done this in a separate computer, put it on a USB drive, and I'm going to go ahead and plug the USB drive in now. So we'll go ahead and click on our USB drive, click on the driver, click Yes, Next, Install, and click Finish. So we've got this pop-up, we're going to click on Yes, and if we click down here, we're now connected to the internet. So first thing I like to do is get Windows fully up to date before I do anything else. We're going to click on the Windows icon, click on the settings, click on Updates and Security, and click on Check for Updates. So what's going to happen is Windows is going to find a whole load of updates. We're going to let these install. Some of them will require a restart, but we're going to come back into here and keep checking for updates and only move on when there's no more updates available. Okay, so that's Windows fully up to date. Whenever I click on Check for Updates, there's no more updates available. Next thing I want to do is get our drivers installed. So we're going to head over to our motherboards page over on ASRock's website. And you can see the drivers that are available for download. Now I've already installed the LAN driver. This is where I came to and clicked on download and put it onto the USB drive. So I don't tend to install all of these, so I'll show you which ones I would install. So I'm going to install the audio drivers, the chipset drivers. Like I said, we've already done the LAN drivers. I don't tend to install the SATA or RAID drivers or the VGA drivers. Then the only other driver, there's not really a driver, it's a program, is ASRock Polychrome to help us control the RGB on our motherboard. So we'll click on it as well. We can then go ahead and close the web page down, head over to our downloads folder, and you'll see the 3 files we have downloaded. We're going to right click and go extract all and extract. And then we're going to repeat that process for each of the 3 files. And then the compressed files we can go ahead and delete. Okay, so let's start off by installing the chipset drivers. Click on Yes, and we're going to click on Install. Okay, we're going to need to restart, so we'll do that now. Okay, we'll go ahead and install the audio drivers. And click on Setup. Click Yes, and click on Next. And again, we're going to have to restart our computer, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And then we can go ahead and install Polychrome. Click yes. Next, next, install. Okay, that's it installed. I'm going to show you this later on with the Lian Li RGB software, but there's one more driver I want to install. Okay, so we're going to get the drivers for our graphics card from NVIDIA's website. I've put all the relevant details into the boxes and I'm going to click on search. To find the drivers, I'm going to click download and download. Okay, if we head over to our downloads folder, click yes, click OK. So I'm just going to go ahead and install the driver. If you want to install the GeForce Experience, you can as well. Click agree and continue. We're just going to go for express installation, click next, and then we can click on close. Okay, so that's all the drivers we're going to need installed. Just before we go into the RGB software, I want to head back to your motherboard's page and take a look at the BIOS tab. So I have got this motherboard pre-release, so the chances are it's got version 1.1 of the BIOS. There is a version 1.2 available, so I'm going to go ahead and download this and put it on a USB drive so that when we go into the BIOS later, if we have only got 1.1 installed, I can go ahead and update it to 1.2 and show you how to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on download. So we can head over to our downloads folder. I'm going to extract the BIOS. And it's this file here that's actually our BIOS file. So I'm going to copy it over to our USB drive, paste. Okay, so that's ready to go for later on. Okay, so let's take a look at the RGB software. So we're going to go ahead and open up Polychrome. Click yes. Okay, so that's us into the program. So we can either adjust the onboard LEDs or the components. And in under the components, we've got our RAM. So I'm going to go ahead and select the RAM. And at the moment, it's set to running. I'm going to go with a static color. So we'll go to static. And then I would like white. So I'm going to go ahead. I can either drag these wheels or we can go into here and drag this all the way over to the top corner. And you'll notice the RAM now has turned to white. So we go ahead back into the onboard LEDs. So I can go ahead and change the individual components, or we can select all the channels. So I'm going to go ahead and select all the channels. At the moment, they are currently set to rainbow. So I can go ahead and click on this and go to static. And again, if I want things to change to white, I'm just going to go ahead and drag this again all the way over to the top corner. And what you will notice is the pump head has changed to white and the lighting on the chipset has also changed to white. Our Lian Li Unifans haven't changed because they're going to be controlled by Lian Li's L-Connect software. So I'll go ahead and show you how to control them now. Okay, so that's us over on Lian Li's webpage and we're going to go ahead and download L-Connect 2. Okay, we head over to the downloads folder. I'm going to right click and go for extract all, extract. Okay, we can click on the L-Connect 2 setup. Okay, so Windows is warning us about the program. We need to click on more info and then run anyway. Click yes. Select English and go for OK, next, next, install. Okay, so this is Lian Li's L-Connect software where we can control the lighting on the fans but also the fan speed. At the moment, the fans are currently set to PWM mode, taking their speed off the motherboard. So I'm going to leave it on this. If you did want to adjust it, you can do it from this pull-down menu. So we need to adjust our RGB. Group 1 is actually the fans on the side of the case. At the moment, they're set to rainbow and only 2 fans are connected. And if you look in the case, only 2 of the fans are lighting up. We've got 3 fans in this group, so I'm going to go ahead and select 3 and click apply. So we can see now that the bottom fan has lit up again and is currently set to rainbow. We'll just go ahead and adjust all the fans into group number 2. I think in this one we've only actually got 1 fan, it's the one at the back. Click apply. And then group 3 is the fans at the front of the case. It's currently set to 2, but we've actually got 3, so we'll click on apply. And you can't actually see this on the screen, but actually the front bottom fan is now lighting up. So if we want to actually change the lighting, we can do it in a number of ways. If you look at the Unifans, there's light in the middle, and there's also the 4 bars around the outside, and we can adjust both. With this symbol selected, it means the whole fan is set to rainbow. If we want to just adjust the center, we can go into here. If we want to just adjust the bit around the outside, we can go to here and pick whatever we want, and we can have completely different effects on the outside and the center. I'm going to be quite boring and do what I normally do and set everything just to static white, because I think it's going to look really good in this white case. So I'm going to select the whole of the fan. I'm going to go for static color, click on OK. And what we can do, you can see the fans are currently blue, red, green and yellow. So if we want all three of the fans in the group to go to white, we need to select the white and paint them in. I'm just going to paint all four. And if I want to apply it just to this group of fans, I would click apply. If I want to apply it to all our fans, I'm just going to click on apply to all. And what you can notice is all the fans in the case have now turned to white. For some reason it's gone back to just 2 fans again, and you can see the bottom fan isn't lit up at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and click on 3 and apply to all. And then the 2 bottom fans at the front are now lighting up again. Okay, so we can close the L-Connect software down. Next thing to do is head over to the BIOS. To do that, we're going to restart our computer, click restart. And then whenever the screen goes black, we're going to start pressing delete, and this will take us into the BIOS. Okay, the screen's gone black. I'm going to start pressing delete. And that's us into the BIOS. Okay, so that's us into the BIOS, and the first thing I'm noticing, we only have version 1.1 installed and 1.2 is available, and that's what we have copied onto our USB drive. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to update the BIOS. The reason I start with this is when you update the BIOS, any changes you've made are quite often reset. So if we make changes, we'd have to do them again. A word of caution in updating the BIOS, you should really only do it if you need to, i.e. if you're having problems with your computer or the new version offers features that you're going to need. Because if something goes wrong during the BIOS update, you can actually brick your motherboard, and it's really important you don't lose power during the update. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Tool. I'm then going to click on Instant Flash. It's found the version of the BIOS on our USB drive. I'm going to click on Update. It's going to ask do we want to do it. I'm going to click Yes. Okay, that's the BIOS updated. I'm going to press Enter to reboot the system. Okay, that's us back into the BIOS, and you can see we're now running version 1.2 of the BIOS. First thing I'm noticing is that our RAM is only running at 2400 megahertz. Although it can run at 3600 megahertz. So we need to head into OC Tweaker. And if we head down here to Load XMP setting, it's currently on auto. So I'm going to click on it, and then we've got 2 profile options we can choose from. I'm going to select the first one, and this will then get our RAM running at 3600 megahertz. Next thing I want to do is head over to the Advanced tab, and then we're going to click on AMD Overclocking. We're going to click on Accept, and then we're going to click on Precision Boost Overdrive. By default, this is set to auto, so you're going to want to go in and click Enabled. So this isn't always something I will come and enable, and it was only when I was doing the thermal testing, the CPU reached a maximum temperature of 55 during an IDA64 stability test, and it should be up in the 80s or the 90s. When I looked at the clock speed, they were incredibly low. I went in and enabled this and actually went back and reran the tests, and the clock speeds were what I would expect them to be, and the temperature back up around about 86 degrees. So I think if you are following this build, you are going to want to enable this, and rather than overclocking, it's really getting the CPU running as I would expect it to. I also want to have a check of our fans while we're in here, so we'll click on the hardware monitor, and it's going to give us some information on our fans. So heading down here, we can see our CPU fan 1, which is the 3 fans on our radiator, is running in standard mode. We can click on here and make any adjustments to it if we want to. To adjust the rest of our fans, we can go into the fan configuration and control all the other fans in the system. Okay, so CPU fan 2 is where we've actually plugged the pump of our AIO, so I'm going to click on it and change it to water pump. It's currently running in auto. It is only a 3-pin connector, so it's going to need to run in DC mode. and at the moment it's running full speed. If I want to change that, I can go into here and adjust it. I'm happy with the pump running at full speed, and that would be what I normally would do. If you find it noisy, you can go in here and adjust it. The only other place we have plugged fans into is into chassis fan 1, and that's the PWM connector coming from our Lian Li hub. So it's currently running in auto. It can run in PWM mode, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. It's on silent mode. I'm just going to go with standard mode for that. And it's currently monitoring the motherboard temperature and adjusting the fan speeds based on that. I'm going to select CPU temperature, so it's going to run off that. Okay, that's all the fans set up just the way I would want them. So I'm going to click on exit, and then we'll click on save changes and exit and click yes. And then the PC will boot back into Windows. First thing I want to do is check our RAM is running at the correct speed. So we right click on the Windows icon and go to Task Manager. We're going to click on more details, click on the performance tab, click on the memory, and we can see it's now running at 3600 megahertz. Okay, so that's the PC looking good and running well. I've also done some thermal testing, and as you'd expect with a PC with 6 intake fans at the front and the 360mm AIO, the temperatures were pretty good. Our CPU idled at 35 degrees, while under a 20-minute AIDA64 stability test it reached a maximum temperature of 86 degrees. Our GPU idled at 29, reaching a maximum of 61 degrees during the 20-minute AIDA64 stability test. And again, as you'd expect with a PC with 10 fans, noise levels were in the moderate to high range. At idle, the average noise levels were 37 decibels, while under the 20-minute AIDA64 stability test, the average noise level was 50 decibels. So definitely one of the things you could do to save yourself some money and bring the noise levels down a little bit is leave the side fans out. Although I think this is going to adversely affect the look of the build, and I think particularly the Lian Li Unifans look great on the side. But this should give you some ideas in terms of temperature and noise levels to help you adjust things. I found this a particularly easy case to build in, and in fact it was one of the easiest cases for cable management at the back. So hopefully you find the video useful. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.